Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So, as you know, Thursday means Tier 1 Thursday, and this week we are heading to Ether Revolt Standard to check out a deck that has kinda taken the format by storm. This is Green-Black Snake, and this build comes from Brennan DeCandio, who recently took it to a first place finish at last week's SCG Open, also performing well at this weekend's event, so having a lot of success with the deck, and this deck is super spicy, so congrats to Brennan on his finish with the deck. A quick reminder before we break it all down: if you enjoy this deck and you want to see it made into videos, take a minute, click the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment, anything you can do to support your deck, because whichever deck is most popular gets a shot at being made into videos next week. So Green-Black Snake is built around Winding Constrictor. That is the snake, and this card might not look like much. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, this is probably a cool casual card. People love hardened scales, people put counters on things in Commander, but no, it is so much more than this. So apparently if you add a black mana to hardened scales and make it into a 2/3, you have a really good card. So Winding Constrictor is the card that kind of makes this deck super scary. This deck is really sort of like a green-black Delirium deck, except it really takes advantage of these +1/+1 counter synergies, and Winding Constrictor allows the deck to get off to some really insane starts by doubling the counters that go on your creatures. So the deck is built around Winding Constrictor, and here's an example of what the deck is doing with it. So most obviously, Walking Ballista is a new card from Ether Revolt. Kind of like a Hangerback Walker, kind of like a Triskelion. Basically, Winding Constrictor doubles the counters on it. So if you play it for 2 mana, it'll come in as a 2/2. You can remove the counters to kill something. It's a great way to fight against the Saheeli Rai combo, or just kill creatures. And then, if you ever flood out, and you have the Winding Constrictor out, you pay 4, and you add 2 +1/+1 counters to it, which equals 2 more damage. And of course, if you cast it for 4 mana, it's a 3/3. So it's just a ton of value, very good in the format, works great with the snake. And then we have Peema Renegade, which is pretty absurd. So imagine turn 2, you play a Winding Constrictor. Turn 3, you play Rishkar. You put a counter on Rishkar and a counter on Winding Constrictor, except Winding Constrictor is going to double those counters, so you're going to end up with a 4/5 Winding Constrictor attacking on turn 3, and a 4/4 Rishkar that you can start using next turn, and both of those can tap for mana if you ever need to in the late game. And then Tireless Tracker is kind of spicy. This lets the deck kind of grind out value with the clue tokens, except whenever you sack a clue, you get a +1/+1 counter. If you got Winding Constrictor, you get 2 +1/+1 counters. And last but not least, the big finisher, and Verdurous Gearhulk is just already an absurdly powerful card. An 8/8 trample for 5 mana, or you could just spread the counters around, and in a Winding Constrictor deck, spreading the counters around is probably the most powerful thing you can do. So you have a curve of something like Winding Constrictor on turn 2, maybe Rishkar on turn 3, some combination of your Walking Ballistas or Tireless Tracker on turn 4, Tireless Tracker, make a land drop, get a clue, something like that. Turn 5, you play your Verdurous Gearhulk, put a counter on all your creatures, and it's going to be 2 counters from your Winding Constrictor, and you just kind of win the game on the spot. Your team is so huge and those counters stay, so even if they kill your Verdurous Gearhulk, it doesn't matter. Just a super powerful card that synergizes really well with the deck's plan. The deck also has a couple cards that don't necessarily work well with the Winding Constrictor plan, but these cards are really good in the kind of green-black Delirium aspect of the deck. So this is kind of like a hybrid. It's kind of like a Winding Constrictor, green-black Delirium. Grimflayer, we know what it does. Really powerful 2-drop, grows to a 4/4 if you have Delirium, kind of does this weird scry graveyard filling thing when you get in damage, so it gives the deck a great 2-drop when you don't have Winding Constrictor. Mindwreck Demon shuts down the air. You can achieve Delirium pretty easily in this deck, so you're not going to be losing life most likely. Also helps fill your graveyard to pump up your Grimflayers. Shuts down most of the big flyers. It's great against Heart of Kirin, for example, which is kind of where the vehicles decks have went now that Smuggler's Copter is gone. So even though these don't necessarily synergize with the Snake plan, they still are just so powerful that they're worth a slot in the deck just as standalone cards. Then we have the Suite of Removal. New addition to the bunch is Fatal Push. Fatal Push is a little weird in this deck. We don't have that many ways to trigger Revolt. There are kind of a couple, but not that many. So it's just a good kill something in the early gameplay that occasionally you'll get into combat, one of your things will die, and you can kill something a little bit bigger. Grasp of Darkness, more copies than Fatal Push, as you can see, because it's more consistently going to kill bigger things in this deck, since you don't have a ton of Revolt triggers. Ruinous Path to deal with Planeswalkers, and a To the Slaughter, which takes advantage of Delirium to get a Planeswalker and a creature. A lot of value if you have Delirium. And then the last non-land main deck card, Traverse of Uvenwald, another green-black Delirium trick. So this lets you tutor up your Verdurous Gearhulk, is probably the most game-ending play now that Emrakul's not in the format. But you can also get a Tireless Tracker for value if you have a bunch of counter-generating things, a Winding Constrictor. So just search up whatever creature's best. Plus, it can get a land in the early game to make sure that you're hitting all your land drops, getting up to that Verdurous Gearhulk. Mana base-wise, Blooming Marsh, Hissing Quagmire is the creature land. Evolving Wilds does trigger Revolt, also helps with the Delirium package by getting a land in the graveyard. In the sideboard, we have some more removals. So To the Slaughter, again, works with Delirium, good against Planeswalkers and creatures. Yahani's Expertise is great in some matchups. White-Red Humans, which we talked about a couple days ago. Any aggressive deck, it's super good. You get a little extra value by putting something into play for free. Natural State to deal with Heart of Kirin, for example, other cheap artifacts. Then we have Lost Legacy, which is another good answer to a Saheeli Rai combo where your opponent's comboing off with one specific card. And then we have some more tutor targets, including Noxious Gearhulk for some removal. Inishkana can kind of clog things up in slower matchups. And then some Bladeswalkers to help if the game's going to go long against control. Against control decks, Planeswalkers are some of the most powerful things you can put on the battlefield. On mixed list, draws cards, kills things. Nissa, Vital Force, can emblem in one turn, which generates a huge stream of card advantage, and also pressure the opponent with hasty 5/5. So great if you're playing against blue-black control or something like that. And that is green-black Snake in Aether Revolt Standard, and that's our instant deck for today. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.